Forewarning First Wives Club, a prominent element in Gothic fiction. The genre of Gothic fiction could be classified by a few important elements, motifs, and themes. Throughout Gothic and women's tradition fiction, recurring elements have shaped the genre. Such common repetition of elements or motifs within Gothic fiction heightens their importance to the stories and the genre as a whole. Closer examination of novels in this genre aids in recognizing the significance of recurring situations. Looking at two novels in this genre, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte and Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, there are many similar aspects between the stories. The repetition of specific motifs suggests such an idea has something to offer about the analysis of Gothic literature altogether. Thus, examining both novels and each heroine's similar romantic situation through textual evidence, their homogeneous psychology and motives become apparent and how they relate to the Gothic tradition. In Jane Eyre, the heroine of the titular name marries her employer, Rochester, to only soon find out she is not the first of his wives. After he finds his first wife has been tormenting Jane, haunting her throughout the night, Rochester tells Jane about Bertha Mason. His first wife, whom he was forced to marry, was deemed insane and an alcoholic and locked away in the attic. Jane quickly sees that her husband harbors not only an ex-wife, but possibly many more secrets and a sinister side. In her novel Rebecca, the protagonist encounters a similar situation as Jane in her story. After discovering that her husband Maxim's ex-wife had not died at the hands of drowning, but rather at those of her own husband. When Bertha's presence is revealed, Rochester claims Bertha's insanity as an excuse for her behavior and treatment. At the revelation of Rebecca's murder, Maxim claimed Rebecca's viciousness, cruelty, and sinister plans. Both men provided reasonable enough excuses for the women to continue on with their marriage, but not without at least some concern. Both love interests in the novels have provided a life for their respective heroines that they had never been privy to before. Yet there is always a caveat to Cinderella come time for the clock to strike midnight. As Jane's marriage goes on and Bertha becomes aware of her presence, she becomes jealous. The first time Jane sees Bertha, she describes her as of the foul German spectre, the vampire, focusing on her savage features and bloodshot eyes. From the time Rochester presents Bertha's past to Jane, she calls her entire being and situation into question. I was in my own room as usual, just myself, without obvious change. Nothing had smitten me or scathed me or maimed me. And yet, where was the Jane Eyre of yesterday? Where was her life? Where were her prospects? Jane Eyre, who had been an ardent, expectant woman, almost a bride, was a cold, solitary girl again. Her life was pale, her prospects were desolate. Jane's description of this personal shift in herself alludes to the idea that Bertha is now a representation of her possible fall from grace back to her too harsh of a reality. Jane has just now comfortably set into her life and marriage to Rochester, adapting to some type of upper-class normalcy, something that has always been just out of reach for her growing up. Looking back to her childhood in which her aunt would punish her by sending her to the Red Room, the parallel of Rochester's wife banished to the attic serves as a constant reminder of what is lurking for her if she is not wise. Despite Rochester's claims of Bertha's family history with mental illness, there is a looming possibility that her chaining up was the cause or exacerbated her illness. The heroine in Rebecca faces a similar change once the truth about her husband's former wife is revealed. I can't forget what it has done to you. I was looking at you, thinking of nothing else all through lunch. It's gone forever, that funny young lost look that I loved. It won't come back again. I killed that too, when I told you about Rebecca. It's gone, in 24 hours. You are so much older. As Maxim points out to the protagonist, her behavior has shifted since his murder confession. The heroine is confronted with the reality that she does not know her husband. She suddenly finds herself in an unfamiliar situation as an entire stranger. The only familiarity those around her in this environment feel is her connection to Rebecca. The heroine is constantly compared to Rebecca. At the ball where she wore Rebecca's themed dress is a pivotal point that highlights the nameless heroine as an embodiment of Rebecca. Why, the dress, you poor dear. The picture you copied off the girl in the galley. It was what Rebecca did at the last fancy dress ball at Manderley. Identical. The same picture, the same dress. You stood there on the stairs, and for one ghastly moment I thought... Beatrice mentions the striking similarities between Rebecca and the heroine not too long before the revelation that Rebecca was in fact murdered by Maxim. The moment identifies the heroine as a proxy for Rebecca, the confession of Rebecca's death now a warning. She will be next if she is not careful. Her whirlwind marriage to Maxim, a man she hardly knows, suddenly becomes a problem. Considering everyone has nothing but raving things to say about the late Rebecca, it is not shocking for the heroine to consider her husband as not truthful in discussing Rebecca's spiteful ways. Yet she does not. The heroine continues her life by Maxim's side through the ups and downs. As we see from the beginning of her story, she moves with the wind, never really planning out her next move. The heroine stays with Maxim partly because she knows nothing more than to go with the flow, but also because she knows what happened to the last wife who betrayed him. Throughout their respective novels, Jane and Jane Eyre and the heroine and Rebecca, they are haunted by the possibility of a harsh, not too far off fate. As both husbands have past wives whom they have hurt or mistreated that are not discovered until the protagonist is married and committed to her husband, such a discovery is the new caveat to their new fantasy life. Both stories show how in the Gothic tradition, a new, exciting situation usually has a dark cloud looming over. And the idea of women's tradition, focusing on female protagonists and the exploration of feminist culture, the representation of this dark cloud as a past wife and a manifestation of a heroine's insecurities and fears onto an other, shows the internalization psychology behind some of literature's most iconic heroines. The reoccurrence of this manifestation of a past wife, almost evil-like surrogate, throughout multiple Gothic women's tradition fiction stories explores an important motif of the protagonist and her motives throughout her respective story, to ensure that she does not end up in a similar situation as her less fortunate predecessor.